Good morning, councillors. Firstly, this meeting or this workshop is being recorded this morning, so just letting you know. This is our first session on the annual plan, so we're about to start that process. So we've got Andrew here today from the policy team, and I'm not sure that he's been before you today, so he can introduce himself. And then it is a start of a process around setting the budget through the annual plan for 26-27. So thanks for that, Your Worship. Over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Julie. Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. For those of you who haven't met me before, I see there are some new faces around the room. My name's Andrew Wilson. I'm one of your policy advisors here at Taupō District Council. And today we're going to go through the annual plan process. So we're going to cover off a little bit about the background of it, what it does, what it doesn't do, and what can you expect. So in terms of purpose today, we're going to discuss what it can and can't do. As I said, we're going to outline what the long-term plan sets out for the financial year 26-27. So that's the plan that's already been adopted by the previous council and what that is indicating for this coming financial year. And then we're also going to seek some direction from you on a proposed approach to managing the rates increase. So in terms of agenda, we're going to go through the planning process and the purpose of the annual plan. What is significance and how does it apply to the annual plan? Capital revaluations as well, we're going to have a conversation about that. In previous years, the community has raised a range of different concerns about how capital revaluations work. So we thought it would be wise of us to have a conversation about that and explain just how that all works. Then we're going to talk to the forecast and the challenges that forecast is facing, and then that proposed approach to finish off. So in terms of the planning process, annual plans are done between LTP years. So they relate to years 2 and years 3 of an LTP. Your LTP serves as your annual plan as well for the first year of that period. And that next long-term plan process will begin soon. As you can see up on the slide there, we've got that annual plan in year 3 there circled. Your future long-term plan is coming very soon. And so planning is already starting to begin on how that process will look. And you'll have start having conversations about that very soon with Kendall. With regards to the annual plan versus a long-term plan, the annual plan process is far more about confirming what was already set down and adjusting where necessary what was set down, as opposed to re-looking at everything possible. Unlike the LTP, that's much more of a place where levels of service and things like that can be considered. So council can make those more substantive changes in a long-term plan setting as compared to an annual plan setting. If we look at the purpose of an annual plan, section 95 outlines what an annual plan must include, the actual document itself. It must contain the annual budget and funding impact statements, and it must identify any variation from those documents that were set down through the long-term plan. Then we can see what types of changes are envisioned by the legislation. With regards to 95A, when you're talking about consultation documents, it talks about significant and material variations from the financial statements, or significant new spending proposals, or explanation of any proposals to substantially delay or not proceed with a significant project. And you'll have noted that the word significant is repeated many, many times there. So that's where we probably need to explain a little bit about what is significance, what does it mean in the context of the LGA, and particularly what does it mean with respect to annual plans. There are 2 tests in the annual plan process that we have to be aware of. So there's the first is the significant and material variations. So those would be items where, if you look on our policy, so we have our own significance engagement policy. The Act tells us when we're determining significance, you must look at your own policy to determine that. And our policy outlines that anything that meets the test of a high level of significant is significant, but that means significant from a legislative perspective. Not is it important to people out there in the community or anyone out there in the community, just does it strictly meet the test for being significant per the legislation. So there may still be particularly affected groups and particularly affected parties that we would want to communicate with on a particular matter, but it may not require full consultation with the community, for example, on any given matter, not just annual plan, but any matter of significance. The other test that you find in an annual plan is related back to section 97. So that talks about the items that an annual plan basically can't change. Those are items that can only be adjusted through an LTP. There are two key matters there. There are levels of service, so significant changes to significant services that council provides to the community cannot be adjusted through an annual plan. That triggers what's called an LTP amendment. If you do attempt to adjust those through an annual plan, that requires an LTP amendment. Given the LTP is not very far away and we're going into a bit of a new world of rates capping and a few other significant reforms occurring with the government, our kind of advice on that would be, hey, that process is coming soon. Focusing there would be the right place rather than triggering an LTP amendment so close to the LTP occurring to start with. Before I move on from that, are there any questions? Just before we move on to having a discussion about capital revaluations, are there any questions around that kind of background to annual plans versus LTPs? Awesome. With capital revaluations, in the past there's been a fair bit of confusion out there in the community. People assume that once a revaluation happens, if my house price or my commercial property's price goes up, that means council's just going to increase its rates. It's just going to come and charge me more money. In this example that we've highlighted here, if we imagine there are only 2 houses in the entire district and council has an entire rates requirement of $10,000. In scenario 1, where both properties are worth the exact same amount, the share that they pay of the pie, the share of the pie they pay is 50-50. If council's rates requirement is still $10,000, but there are revaluations, and house 2 is revalued to $750,000, you then end up with a 60-40 split between these two properties because house 2's value has increased proportional to house 1 more. So it then pays for more of the pie. It does not mean that council then says, hey, house 2, we need more than $10,000. We still need $10,000. It just determines who pays what of that $10,000. That's been a concern in the past for people because in 23-24, when revaluations were last done, residential property, as we're probably all aware, went through the roof in terms of those valuations. Those valuations went up significantly more than commercial, industrial and rural property did. So the rebalancing of that share of the pie, more people in the residential environment paid more money than they otherwise would have the way the pie was divided before those revaluations. So people felt that when those revaluations happened, and that's what drove a lot of that discussion in 23-24 and since. Are there any questions about that? Any queries?
Yes. I've always been told that it doesn't make that much difference, and if it drops, which it's likely to, and well, it looks like it would, that wasn't going to make any difference at all if it dropped. It wouldn't really affect rates. Is that not true?
Not in terms of the rates requirement for council.
I'm talking about how you split the pie.
Yeah, so...
Sorry. Oh.
So before I jump ahead, I thought you had something to say on that one.
Oh, no. Sorry, I was just supporting you, Andrew. I was like working along with you. No, so it just depends proportionally. So again, if that was commercial versus residential and commercial goes up, for example, they will pay more of the pie. So their rates will go up comparatively compared to residential. The requirement's the same, as Andrew said. So council doesn't collect more or less rates, they just may collect more or less rates from sectors or individual properties that have gone up higher in proportion.
What if they drop?
So if they drop, so if your house has dropped the exact same proportion, so if we have a 20% drop in house values and right across the district we have 20% drop in other sectors, then your rates requirement will be the exact same. However, generally speaking, Yeah. No, I know, and this is what's so confusing, but generally speaking, different sectors drop and that pie does move slightly. So you might have, say, farm prices are up because of the dairy payout or whatever other factor. Then they might end up paying slightly more than residential. If theirs stay the same and residential falls, then their share of the pie will be more.
Right, I think. Thank you.
So Sarah, just what about if an individual property, a house, though for some reason, say a house got burnt down and the valuation would come in lower, they'd pay less?
Yes, they would, because proportionally their property would have gone down higher than the rest of the district. So, say house prices go down 20% and mine goes down 20% on average, theirs might go down 60%. So then they will pay less. But if theirs only went down 20%, because their house didn't burn down, they would probably be paying the same.
I don't know if this is of any help, but how I wrap my head around it is that there's some feedback there. Duncan, do you want to maybe... Oh, no, it's okay. The way I look at it is that we know what our rates revenue amount is. That amount doesn't change based on the value of your property. So we still need to bring in the same amount of money.
Yep.
It's just on a pro rata basis of the value of your home. Like a tenancy, you're occupying 1,000 square metres, and your square metre rate is this.
Yep.
It's just like that.
I get that.
Yeah.
Except when it drops, I've always been told, nah, makes no difference. And I couldn't come to terms with that.
Well, it would be relative to every other property as well.
And
So if
it
all of
actually-
residential properties are
yes,
dropping
I'm
on
not-
average
I wasn't
20%.
talking about individual, I'm talking about collectively, and I've always been led to believe not.
Well, we set the budget, we know how much we need to bring in. It stays the same regardless of the value of your house or my house
Yes,
or that building.
I get that.
So it's a pro rata on how much of that budget your house contributes to. I don't know if that helps or not, but I think of it as one big bucket, and all that commercial puts a certain amount in, residential puts a certain amount in to reach the level of the bucket that we need. I don't know if that helps.
It does.
Christine, just for your benefit, if you're going to your next, Duncan, but you need to turn your mic on so it's being recorded.
Oh, sorry.
Just supplementary.
Duncan.
Supplementary, or are you going into
Oh,
the
you go.
topic?
You go.
So we use that example of $10,000 where it's gone up. So one would pay $5,000 in the first example, the other $5,000, and then you drop down, and the percentage would be $7,500, $2,500 to the other property. So then the same thing, if the values go down, it's still the same amount. It's still $10,000. It's just how it gets divided over the property. So the same going up as going backwards.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Duncan.
Yes, mine's just a question of clarification, really, because you mentioned that, yes, residential places shot up, house prices shot up relative to business. So the residential portion of the pie got greater opposed to the business. That's what you. Yes.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yes. So I'm just interested and rural is another sector again, which was it's all relative. Is there no mechanism that residential can be ring fenced from business, which can be ring fenced from rural, so that their pieces of the pie are always the same?
Sorry. No, so there's no mechanism where you can ring fence it. However, and Andrew probably didn't go into this because it was just going to be one more level of confusion. But we do have, this is capital value only, right? We also have our UAGC proportion, and you can, particularly when there are sectors hard impacted, you can adjust your UAGC proportion. You've got to be really careful what you do outside a long-term plan. Because obviously you've consulted on the community with how you're going to rate, but from a capital value perspective, no, there's no ability to ring fence certain sectors, and that would be fairly unfair.
Oh, I'm just a little bit surprised that this seems like something obvious to me that should no.
We don't think the same.
No. just seems, yeah, anyway. Well, okay, that's my answer.
So Sarah, UHB?
UAGC. So at Taupō, UAGC is already very comparatively low. So there is very little room for flexibility. So that was something that I was intending to propose to elected members to change through the last long-term plan. The challenge with that was that residential was already very hard hit by the fact that a lot of the cost drivers are in three waters, so a lot of the targeted rates already hit them, and again, we didn't even cover targeted rates here, so it gets quite even more complicated than that. And then also the fact that the valuations over the last 2 or 3 valuations have been severely increased comparatively. So ideally, next long-term plan, we might adjust the UAGC so you do have a little bit of flexibility to make sure that you can, in times of large revaluation, inequities, that you can kind of adjust. But we do not have that ability at the moment, unfortunately.
So to the chair, just one thing. Yeah, look, I've never paid so much attention to the mechanism of this, but I seem to recall there is one thing we're able to do, and forgive me if you've already mentioned it, but commercial, we can adjust the commercial rate. So that's a sort of a bodgy way of rebalancing it, isn't it? That's the only way we've sort of got.
Well, there's a couple of things that I already mentioned, but you absolutely can change your rating differentials, and if you can remember, we did that for industrial, particularly the electricity sector, through the last long-term plan, but that does require consultation with your community, because that is a big change in how you rate. So you're saying one sector is then increasing their share of the pie, essentially, and you want agreement from the community that seems like a sensible and appropriate thing to do.
Yes, so that is the mechanism. I was sort of, well, it is that's the mechanism. You can do it. Yeah.
Well, it gets there's a few things, but it's rating is very complicated. The legislation is very complicated. And we do make recommendations through long-term plan, particularly to correct's the wrong word, but particularly when we see there's certain aspects we would like to ensure fair distribution, such as a differential loss.
And the UAGC is a fixed flat fee. It isn't relevant or relative to the value of your house. No. So your house might only be worth $450,000, but you will pay the same UAGC figure as someone whose home is $3 million.
Yeah.
So when you increase that is likely to affect people in lower valued homes than it would someone in a higher valued home. So unlike the capital value and setting of rates being relevant to the value of your property, the UAGC does not take into consideration the value of your home. So,
which is the real challenge in increasing it to be able to have that flexibility, is that there will be an impact on residential and there will be an impact on particularly lower value residential, which we do have the ability to model all of that for you guys now through the next long-term plan, which is great that the rates team have done a bit of work so we can heat map that and have a look at how best to distribute rates throughout the district. That's probably not an annual plan conversation, and as you can see, even when we talk about the pie, it gets very confusing for people, and that's probably why Andrew wanted to put it on the sides, because we're going to have a lot of queries in this space and our team is going to be very busy talking to people about revaluations.
Before you go, Sarah, thanks very much, Andrew and Sarah. Just on the back of what's coming out of central government, are we going to be able to show to our people and our rates going forward that they will actually have a rates cap? That's going to be your challenge. If people are going to get rates and they're told they've got a rates cap and they get their rates that go up, how are we going to face that challenge?
Yes, I think that comes down to communications, and Andrew covers it, I think, later in his slides. So again, that's probably clear communication, and again, that's what Andrew wants to talk to you about, what this maybe looks like going forward, and then the lead into the long-term plan as well.
Just bearing in mind the rates cap doesn't legally apply until 2029. Yes. So we just need to be clear to the community around when it will depending on government decisions when it is expected to kick in. And I do believe that there will be some comms required, because I believe how government announced it, there's an expectation that probably already applies.
Yeah, so Andrew's going to talk about that, and again, expectations versus other legislation which requires us to have a certain level of service with the community, particularly where agreed through a long-term plan.
Thank you very much. Anything else before we move on from that one? Excellent. So, in terms of your long-term plan for this coming financial year, up on the slide there, I've presented some of the figures in terms of a comparison from LTP year to LTP year. So you can see there that in terms of total increase for rates requirement, council compared to this year to next year per the long-term plan, so caveat there, it's not per annual plan to LTP, we're looking at this is just looking LTP to LTP. It's $9.3 million increase total for all of council for rates requirement from the community. Three Waters makes up $4.4 million of that, and the rest of council, all the other services put together, $4.8 million. So collectively, after allowing for growth, that's the 6.7% increase that is listed in our LTP for this coming financial year. That's that 6.7 number, that's where that comes from. If you put it another way, and you imagined that Three Waters, including its costs and its revenues, was its own thing, and the rest of council is its own thing, Three Waters would be going up 8.5%, and the rest of council is going up 5.5%. So, as you can see from that sort of helps demonstrate that we are in this challenging space with Three Waters, with the legislative reforms that have come through. There is a lot of expenditure occurring in Three Waters. I mean, making up effectively half of that total increase for the coming financial year. So just so we're really clear, that 6.7% increase number that's forecast includes Waters and the rest of council. It is not exclusive. And that's a key point in the future, because the forecast or the proposed legislation around rates capping specifically creates a carve out for Three Waters. Three Waters is carved off. It is not subject to that rates cap. As Sarah said before, the rates cap also doesn't take effect legally for some time. However, the government has sent an indication that obviously they're going to be monitoring how people are tracking towards getting to that target over time. So there is some information there for you to kind of put into context where we are now and where you're going to eventually get to through your long-term plan process. Are there any questions about those numbers in particular? Any queries?
It does cause me to wonder, Andrew, with the annual plan, we can't really change it because of the long-term plan.
Through the chair, yeah. The annual plan has significant limitations compared to a long-term plan. It doesn't allow as strong of mechanisms, like we can't go out, again, subject to an LTP amendment, to relitigate things like levels of service with our community. As you will all be aware, levels of service are key cost drivers for all of council. We say to the community, we're going to provide facilities that meet certain standards, that do certain things for them, and if we wanted to change that, that's a significant conversation with our community about what they're getting. Likewise with projects that have been placed into the annual plan, if you're making major shifts, so then we need to consult our community on them, and if they're going to be fully cancelled, we would need to have a serious conversation with the community about those matters. Now, we can make minor tweaks very easily in an annual plan, deferring things out a year, shifting timing slightly to reflect realities that have changed since we did that planning. That's the purpose of the annual plan fundamentally, is to make tweaks to what we thought was going to happen 3 years ago when the planning was done, to reflect the realities that we're experiencing today. We make those tweaks, we make those changes. The LTP really is the tool to change a lot of things, to change what council is fundamentally doing. If that's how far you collectively would like to go, that is the mechanism. The LTP is that mechanism.
So we can delay capital expenditure on the annual plan.
Correct. Again, subject to that significance test. If it's significant and material, then we would be triggering consultation, which then again obviously takes time and resourcing from council. And with an LTP coming so soon, I guess the suggestion would be potentially that council look at making minor adjustments to that capital program, and then significant discussion through the LTP about are projects going to continue, are projects going to be cancelled, what's going on there. That's really the tool to look at the whole plan, not just in isolation of individual projects, but as a kind of collectively all of council look in terms of those levels of service. Because you'll probably find that there are a number of projects, and I won't speak to any specific business unit, but there will be a number of projects that people have proposed that will be related to forward-looking levels of service for the community. So we've said our level of service will be here, and in order to meet that, because we've got growth, because something's happening out there in the community, we're going to need to spend some money at a later date to make sure we hit that. If those levels of service change, then our business units, our parts of the council that carry out those services, will need to relook at really what they're proposing. So there's some challenges there in terms of trying to make those changes in isolation of that conversation about levels of service in the future.
Just trying to wrap my head around the three water costs. The figures here, they're not additional costs because of the changes in the three water space. They are the three water services all up. Is that correct?
Correct. So those changes in budget are the changes in budget for the total rates requirement for three waters. So that cost is driven by the changes to legislation, but it's also driven by other things like the cost of chemicals, for example. So, obviously we buy chemicals from the market. If that market changes and there's an increase in those costs are reflected in those increases in price. So
do we know then the additional costs that these changes have caused to that?
I don't have that available to me right now, but we can see if we can answer that specifically in terms of the historical numbers, what just those changes are driving.
Would it be nice to have that just as a back pocket to explain why things have increased so much?
Andrew.
Thank you, Wisha. Andrew, when I look at this saying the average rate increase is 6.7% and the financial strategy sets a limit of 8.2%, that means what?
So financial strategy outlines that the limitation for council's rates increases on the community in terms of financial prudence and balanced fiscal management sets a limit of LGCI plus 5%. That was the number that was adopted, I believe, was it through the previous long-term plan. That was an adjustment from what it was previously on the basis of the high period of inflation we're experiencing, where regularly you're getting numbers that were a lot higher than we had previously set. So that's where that 8.2 comes from. That's LGCI plus 5%. That 8.2 is what's set in the long-term plan. LGCI plus 5% now, actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but LGCI is actually running a little bit higher than what was forecast. So actually that number would probably be more towards 8.5.
That means...
In terms of the limit. So
that means that we can spend to that 8.5, as you're saying now? Yes?
Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah, effectively that's what was consulted on, and that's what has been agreed, that is the limit. That's obviously the maximum. It's a self-imposed limit. And
so why wouldn't we aim for that limit to bulletproof ourselves going forward when we know that we've got rates caps coming? Why would we not work to the maximum that we're allowed at present?
Look, obviously that's for council to debate in terms of how you set your budgets. I guess the rest of this presentation actually sets out where we're at in the process and how we will bring you information to be able to have those debates.
Thanks,
that's
Julie.
absolutely a valid point.
Thank you.
Kylie.
Thanks, John. Just something I wanted to highlight, just to be cognisant of as we have these conversations. It's really easy to look at a capital project and consider CapEx, but then CapEx has an impact on OpEx, which then has an ongoing annual effect, and just we need to really think about that. While it's lovely to come up with a new project, but then what are the ongoing costs of that project going to be? It's not just the initial cost. Sorry, that was a statement. And then my question is, are we able to get a figure? So a $1 million spend equates to what is a percentage of rates, just so that we can have a high level thought in our mind. So is it 1 for 1, is 1 million, 1%, just a figure that we can work to within our minds?
Through the chair, the rule of thumb historically has been that $1 million worth of OPEX equates to about 1% on rates. So in that context, CapEx, however, is a little bit different because it being debt funded, the costs are spread over time based on the depreciation schedule of that asset. So you could have an asset that's got a 100-year lifespan that's going to have a different impact on following year OPEX costs than an asset with a 10-year lifespan. Again, and those depending on the costs of those assets. They do have ongoing OPEX costs, but those OPEX costs are primarily then realised in the year following. So once the asset is then realised, we've built the thing, we then say we have this asset, the following year we begin depreciation on that asset. That's when the real cost of building that thing impacts council.
Okay, so you said the OPEX was 1 for 1, so 1 million to 1%. So I'm interested in our annual plan, the OPEX and CapEx and what impact that has. So what the spend is to what that equates to as a percentage. So that 1% is not correct because that's only the OPEX amount. It's not including the CapEx stuff.
Yeah, through the chair. So for 1% is when we're just looking at OPEX. So $1 million of OPEX is 1%.
Yeah, I understand that.
And then you've got a CapEx number.
No, I want the two together because we're looking at rates increases. So if we're spending $1 million, what percentage does that equate to? Sorry.
Stay up there, Sarah.
Or just give a rough figure for capital, just capital alone. I mean, a really, really rough as guts range, that would be interesting.
Capital alone is a very hard figure to get given we've got three different major funding sources. So we've got level of service, which generally, as Andrew said, is debt funded, and it depends on the life of the asset. So if you build a lot of short life assets, then that's going to have a higher impact than the longer life assets. So our, wooders and roading assets generally have quite long lives. And then we've got growth funded stuff, which generally shouldn't come at a cost to council. Yes, from a long-term perspective, you're going to add more OPEX, but your new rates are also going to pay for that. So your growth should pay for growth. And then you've got your renewals. So that's funded from reserves or depreciation. So when we talk about, and Andrew's going to get to it, depreciations increase because we fund that from OPEX each year. So the people using the assets pay for those assets. Then that is paid for essentially through your depreciation and your depreciation reserves. So renewals should be paid for already through OPEX. So if you're doing any renewals, they've already been accounted for in OPEX. If you're doing growth projects, that should be paid by growth. If you're doing level of service projects, that's where it does have an ongoing impact. And I think you'll find when we went and did the L2P, we cut out a lot of those level of service projects for that reason. However, how much that has an impact on rates does depend on the life of the assets.
That's an awesome explanation. Please could I request that when we're getting things like the long-term plan and the annual plan that we get a percentage impact on rates so that we can look at a project rather than at the number, and then we've got a concept of where and how that's going to be funded and what the impact's going to be on our community. Yes, because I think our community needs to know.
Yes, certainly when we present projects through the long-term plan, we will have to do, and this is the rating impact at project level. Again, suspecting under a rates capped environment, and given what I've seen in New South Wales, level of service projects almost become redundant. They get a lot of state and federal funding for their CapEx projects, and they actually say we don't want it because of the ongoing OPEX, because of the impact on rates. So improving level of service is generally not what happens under rates capped environment. So we're down to our renewal projects and our growth projects, which renewal projects are funded already through rates, and in order to maintain that level of the asset, we have to spend the money and ensure our budget's balanced. And then with the growth projects, that should be paid for, and certainly that is the government's intention behind the development levy scheme going forward too.
Oh, through the chair, just to clarify summation, sorry, a very basic understand. So what I'm hearing is that yes, $1 million of OPEX is in terms of impact to the rates is far greater impact to rates than 1 million of capital works. I mean, you can say that, can't you?
Yeah, for sure. 1 million of capital works in general, unless it's a level of service project, is already accounted for in rates or paid for through development contributions. So CapEx doesn't have the same impact unless it's a level of service project, which you will have to be very careful about in the long-term plan, because it will increase rates, and increasing level of services and having rates caps are kind of two opposing things.
So maybe a couple of examples of OPEX, just for...
Yeah, Andrew is, sorry, no, Steve. Andrew is getting there, because I know we probably presented this first and now there's a heap of questions. We do have a lot of pressure in that OPEX space. I've already talked about depreciation, but we know as infrastructure construction prices go up and continue to remain steady in that, they're certainly not where they were a couple of years ago, but we're still having a lot of pressure in that funding of depreciation space. Andrew's got a future slide on that. Not that I've seen the slide, check notice.
Steve.
Hey, Sarah, do we have the equivalent of like an E-better line in our budget forecast? E-better.
No. So through the statement of comprehensive revenue expenses, essentially you get a line that shows how much surplus you have. So it's called surplus rather than earnings, because obviously council reinvests surplus however you set out through the financial strategy and long-term plan, but it's not the same as a commercial. But we do have essentially the financial statements are modelled off international financial reporting standards, which try to align with commercial where they can, but it's surplus rather than a return.
Just going to add, we do have a session coming up shortly on our financial strategy as we kick off the LTP, so it will get a little bit challenging as we work through annual plan and then have some wider conversations, but yeah, we need to get through annual plan first.
Andrew.
Thank you very much. So as you guys can all see, it's a pretty complex space in terms of making changes. Those changes have lasting effects. So we have to be conscious of what we're doing, and that's why obviously the LTP is that longer term horizon piece of work that helps with that, and this is more a budget adjustment space. Are there any further questions on those numbers before I move on to the next slide and I talk about the pressures that those numbers are seeing? Awesome. So in terms of challenges, costs have increased significantly across a number of areas since 3 years ago when these budgets were forecast. They're, at the end of the day, they were a best guess at that point in time. Three Waters reform and the financial separation required for that has changed dramatically since 3 years ago. 3 years ago, people were not talking about ComCom. ComCom wasn't the regulator in the room. ComCom was a national government proposal after they got rid of Three Waters. At that time, it was anyone's guess. Now we have the Commerce Commission as a regulator, and we have an additional set of requirements to deal with both Taumata Arawai as the water quality and standards regulator, and the Commerce Commission as a commercial regulator for the activity. So that's one of the big changes right there that changed between when we first did our planning and now. We've got the other central government reforms that are coming down the pipeline, and central government doesn't necessarily care too much about our planning horizons and our long-term plan horizons. They will do their reform processes when they do, based on their governance time horizons. And so we need to respond to them regardless of that. So you've got things like the RMA reform, you've got rates capping, as we've talked about, coming down the pipeline, and you've also got simplifying local government reform proposal around, which is the changes to regional councils at this stage, but also the outflows of that. Council will have to respond to that in the longer term. So those are things that we have that are just additional costs and changes to the environment compared to those 3 years ago. And we've got when we respond to those, that obviously has a cost in staff time, and your time. In terms of
Andrew, with a long-term plan, which we're going to be started on shortly, and we've already got an existing long-term plan, but we do a new one, when does that kick in? Do we have to wait till the current one's expired, or?
Through the chair. So when you do your new long-term plan, this annual plan will be for next financial year. Your long-term plan will be for the following financial year, and then the years past that. This current plan is what this annual plan relates to. You can amend the current plan, which is an LTP amendment, but that has to be audited, and it has to go through effectively the same process as an LTP, which is, especially with audit costs, is significant cost to make to do an LTP amendment when you have an LTP so close. So we would have to then do an LTP amendment, and then we would be in a space of doing an LTP straight after, because your LTP has now expired. So if that follows.
Yeah, understand. There are high expectations from the public and from the government that we're making changes. It appears that's going to be a bit of a challenge to do that, but I think nevertheless we should look at what we can do.
Through the chair, with these challenges, as I've put here on the bottom of the slide, currently staff are working through looking for efficiencies and savings where we can to help manage these pressures, to make sure that we're, first of all, not blowing out that 6.7% number, that we're not getting above that number. However, there'll need to be some trade-offs to get to that number. That will require us to change some of the work program and change some of the things that we're doing to make sure that those costs don't push us up towards higher numbers than that 6.7, let alone get down below that forecast number through an annual plan process. The mechanism of an annual plan is much more restrained than that LTP process. That LTP process, when you talk those levels of service with the community, and the ongoing costs and the ongoing consequences of that will allow you, council, to make much more effective change than an annual plan process will.
Kevin.
Excuse me, more of a comment than a question. I think it's important to remember the last long-term plan we had amongst the highest submission rate of any council in the country, and 73 or 74% of people who did submit said follow the plan or do more. So we've got significant buy-in already, but the two big things that have changed is the rates cap environment and the three waters separation, which are really big ticket items. So it's important to remember that people have already told us they like the plan.
So when you say do more, do they mean to spend more money or spend less?
No,
what do you mean by do more?
Follow the plan as it was outlined in the long-term plan, do exactly what we said we consulted on, or do more than that.
But
Seriously.
that's more cost.
Absolutely it is, yeah.
In the last process we went through for the long-term plan, and I found really helpful, was that the staff separated projects and things into the things we must do, the things we should do, and the things that we would like to do. And then basically we went through that and put a red line through virtually everything we would like to do. Most of what we should do was delayed, and we stuck with what we had to do, and then a very small amount of some nice to haves that the community had asked for. So you will literally have to go through line by line and decide what of the things we must do can we afford. How do we meet those obligations with the things we must do within a rates cap environment? Yeah, it's going to be tricky. we're going to have to make some really tough calls on levels of service. Do we stop putting soap in bathrooms? You know, it'll get down to that at some point.
Just one more quick comment. Sandra makes a good point just earlier on around why don't we just front load a lot of these projects to get ahead of it. I'm conscious on some of the things I've read from DIA and Commerce Commission that they are watching all councils very closely to ensure that ahead of the rates cap, councils don't do exactly that. Front load it so that when the rates cap come in, and we need to be really careful around what we burden the community with ahead of it. I get it, it would be nice to do that, but we will be under a lot of scrutiny both from our ratepayers and from central government if we decide to start doing that. There's no easy answer.
Just to comment on that, Kevin, we're very modest at 6 point something. I mean, compared to the rest of the nation, that's modesty itself. So, you know, when we're looking at 8, I can't imagine that we could be held to account over that. But you're right, I know they are looking at it.
Duncan?
Well, yeah, just I'd like to point out that, bouncing on what Rachel was saying, that good old Boom Boom usefully but quite unjustifiably pretty much took a lot of the heat coming from the residents last year for what it was worth. Good old Boom Boom.
Andrew,
Thank
please
you.
carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to that, we've got those higher uncontrollable costs. Electricity, you know, everyone's talking about it in the media around the cost of electricity. It hits us as well. Depreciation, as Sarah alluded to earlier, depreciation is up $750,000 a year on to year. So compared to this year, next year we're forecasting an increase of $750,000. So nearly 1% increase on rates just to depreciate the assets you already have. Just to look after the stuff we have already got.
But that must be new items we've added in.
There will be some new items that will be added into the depreciation bucket, but also when revaluations occur. So those assets get revalued at regular intervals, and given the costs of construction are not looking like they're slowing down anytime soon, particularly for our larger infrastructure items, those replacement value costs just keep going up, and therefore their values also keep increasing. Last time when we had revaluations, we saw a humongous jump in the cost of depreciation, significantly above and beyond the cost of the new assets that were added to the asset base.
Duncan?
Oh, you just point out to everyone, I've mentioned this before, that depreciation is optional. We choose to do it. Not every council does it. There's many arguments against not doing it. We're doing the right thing, but I'm just pointing that out.
Remember how we did defer by just 2% or something like that, and we then had to claw that back and then make up the difference. So,
I'm getting a lot of good steps in today, so that's a positive. Depreciation is actually a financial prudence, principle and a factor in legislation. So I think when we talked about the rates capping submission the other day, we were talking about the fact that there are actually 2 opposing pieces of legislation when rates caps come in. So would really like some clarification from central government whether we should be still funding depreciation. Those councils who haven't chosen to either move away or partially move away from funding depreciation no longer have balanced budgets generally, and they are under scrutiny of DIA because they don't meet their financial prudence benchmarks. So those are councils who the DIA keep really close eye on because essentially they've gone away from financial prudence. So financial prudence is ensuring you're doing right by the ratepayer money. So those councils, generally speaking, aren't funding their renewals, which is challenging from a asset standard and asset sustainability perspective because you're sweating your assets.
It's a slippery slope eventually if you're not accounting for depreciation. Most companies, you can get away with it for a year or 2, but it's going to catch you eventually.
So with that in mind, with those types of costs in terms of the OPEX space going up, that's obviously placing pressure on what that forecast budget was. That forecast budget for 6.7, to try and achieve that, as we've said, will require trade-offs, which council will need to have a discussion about, which we will look to bring to you. So on my next slide here, we have a proposed approach which we want to seek your direction on. We're going to attempt to present a draft budget to you with a rates increase of 6.7% or less through trade-offs, savings and efficiencies, which you will then be able to debate. The options presented in that budget will be limited to those that will not trigger an LTP amendment, given that we're so close to an LTP. And that reflects our current level of service agreement with the community. We're not going to propose cutting levels of service through this annual plan process. As previously mentioned, the LTP is coming, and Kendall will come to talk to you about opportunity around doing early engagement with the community in light of rates capping. What does the community want? What does the community want to see? How do they want to go into that rates capping environment? The current proposal is for April for that conversation to happen. However, that's not been confirmed or locked in yet, but that's the indicative time frame.
Andrew, can we just butt in there? Have you got something, Christine?
Yeah, look, I'm really sorry, and you've sort of moved forward, and dare I ask this, but Wanganui had a 2.4% rate increase or something. Have we asked them what they've done? Have we looked at what they've done? Are they taking incredibly huge risks? I just think it wouldn't be the business-like thing to do. If someone's pulling off something that is a dream for us, maybe a nightmare, what have they done to do it, and have they put themselves at massive risk? So I'm sorry, it was in the last lot, but well, I still think we should. I'd like to know. It doesn't have to be now. I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Well, if you know. Yeah.
Look, I probably don't want to get into what individual councils have done. I know a number of councils have done things such as non-fund appreciation to get rating relief. I know of a council who their mayor presents regularly saying how cheap their rates were through this time where we've all had high rates increases, and essentially they got a dividend through a commercial organisation, and that is not a sustainable mechanism going forward, and it's only a smoothing mechanism. So we could non-fund some stuff as well. We could loan fund operational if that's where councils want to go. It's not a prudent financial measure, and I know a number of councils have done a number of things to ease the burden on their communities, because it has been hard. As an officer and the CFO, I would not be recommending those measures pre-rates cap, but again, that's that would be your decision if you want something more dramatic like that presented.
And the other thing they've done is increase fees and charges. So they've put their fees and charges up, so they're not rating, it's more user pays. So in addition to deferring everything, cutting funding, cutting levels of service, they're also increasing fees and charges, so there's a larger user pays model. So that bandwidth that we usually work with, 70-30, something like that, it's probably more like 50-50 or something.
Yeah, so fees and charges is a mechanism, but again, you've got a revenue and funding policy, and sorry that every council calls it something different. It might be called revenue financing policy. There we go. Which then sets out how much you get from fees and charges and how much as a rates funded, impact given the wider district-wide, good that whatever service presents. So there are opportunities to have that conversation through a long-term plan, and again, in an annual plan process, we can work between the boundaries agreed with the community, but it's very hard to make massive swings in that space. But again, if the council direction was to do some more drastic stuff to get that rates cap lower before having rates increase lower before having the conversations about how we're going to get to the rates cap with the community, then absolutely as an officer we can go away and consider and present your options, but probably not pretty options.
That wasn't what I was advocating. I just thought that it was important for us to know, because if we really got stuck in that position, what would it mean? So that was the only perspective, and I thought it was important for us all to know. So that was where I was coming from.
Oh, look, I'll just follow up. I mean, Rachel has obviously a fairly negative view of what they did, but interestingly, I listened to an interview with the Wanganui Mayor, might have been on the platform at RCR some time ago, And he was just, I mean, in his own words, I'm paraphrasing, there was no single magic silver bullet. It was a raft of lots of things. But one thing he was quite intrigued about, he found very interesting, is that he received lots of commendations from, you know, politicians or councillors around the country, but not a single one actually asked him, how did you do it? He found that intriguing, actually, and I'm sure, I'm sure he would be open to us contacting him and asking him and I'm sure he'd be happy to give us some feedback.
Yeah, through the chair, can I just come back to Councillor Taylor's point earlier, which was on the community actually supported this plan. I totally understand circumstances have changed and sentiment has changed, and the community are feeling these tough times, so absolutely not disrespecting that. However, through the long-term plan, there were a number of councillors who did have a reduction in level of service plans. So again, we're probably in a different position depending on what the community feedback was at time of the long-term plan. So again, working within the boundaries of an annual plan, unless you want to do a long-term plan amendment, which I suggest you wouldn't be rating this first instalment this year. But yeah, that's kind of the boundaries we can work within. And again, 74% of the community at the time did agree with or wish to do more than what we had budgeted, which is a challenge for us, right, to reconcile that to probably the sentiment now.
Through the chair, just to speak to the point around fees and charges as well, through this annual plan and through the LTP, council resolved to change its approach towards fees and charges. Rather than setting those fees once at the start of the 3-year period, we now look to do annual adjustments. So I will be bringing an item to you with another adjustment to fees and charges in line with inflation. So that item will come to you with fees and charges being adjusted to keep up with inflation. That has already been agreed as part of the LTP. So we will bring that item to you as part of this annual plan as well, just so we're clear that fees and charges, we should no longer be slipping behind on fees and charges as inflation and costs increase. We should be trying to keep up as best we can in that space. So that item will also come to you. Continuing on with the slide, unless we've got a question.
I just want to comment that I'd hate to see any delay in making decisions on that rating increase. I mean, the public's still getting over the confusion on being rated 3 times the other year, and still playing catch up for a lot of those people who have struggled with that concept.
And through the chair, if we were to try and do an LTP amendment, it is highly likely we would be in a space where we would be doing something odd again, like 3 instalments, because we would not be able to meet our legislative deadline, because the LTP amendment must then be audited by Audit New Zealand, and my understanding is that their availability for conducting audits at this time of year is limited. So we would be in a very tough spot in terms of conducting that LTP amendment, let alone the cost of having audit turn up, and they keep jacking those fees up and keep charging us more money for their services. So we'd be quite stuck.
And I think through the chair, given the confusion already that we're going to have to talk about the pie and the distribution of rates throughout the community, and we're want to go out with early engagement with the long-term plan, that's kind of a lot of things to talk to the community about as well.
So through the chair, apologies.
Oh no.
My speaker's not working.
If your microphone's not working.
My mic's not working. Yeah, I'm happy with this proposed approach. The only kind of question I had, and this is coming from somebody who has probably like 50% financial literacy, when you present it to us, when you present the draft budget in its format, I think I'm talking about the format, with a rates increase 6.7% or less through trade-offs, are you going to identify the trade-offs and everything as that, so we'll be able to see all of that? Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, yes, we will show elected members the list of items and what those trade-offs look like. and what officers have, where officers have found savings, we'll also note that. And so you will be able to see what those look like, where we've managed to save the money, and what we're proposing that the community will notice, the things that the community will notice, what those items are and what the proposal is to do with them, whether it's a project being delayed by a year or a operational cost being deferred. All those things will be noted for you, and you will all be able to have the debate on those specific items. Having said that, that proposed approach on there, that's what we're proposing we do, is work towards trying to avoiding an LTP amendment, work to try and achieve 6.7% or less in light of those challenges we've discussed, and then present that to you for your debate, for you to have a discussion about each of those items. On that, if those items are small items that do not trigger significance, as we talked about, there may also be opportunity to, there would be an opportunity that we wouldn't be required to consult on this annual plan. If those items are significant, naturally we would need to consult the community. If there's significant delays, significant variations from our financial documentation. So that test that was in that chart, that comes from our significance and engagement policy, we can provide that to you. It's on the website as well. But if those items kind of trigger that test and tip us over that boundary, then we would need to consult. But we would like to understand from you today, what is your level of comfort? If those items were not significant or material, would you be comfortable with not consulting the community, but still communicating the outcome of this annual plan through a range of different channels? Obviously, Council has the newspaper, social media, Connect newsletter. We have various community organisations that we go and regularly talk to, and officers and staff can go to those meetings and discuss what's happened, why it's happening, in light of this annual plan, and then also help prepare the community and communicate to the community that, hey, we have an LTP coming, there's going to be big changes coming, and help encourage that consultation process on that LTP piece that's coming forward soon.
Well, and considering we actually have constraints within this current long-term plan, it's already been consulted on. There's only so much we can actually do, so our range of options is kind of somewhat limited.
Cool, thank you. Sorry, can I just ask supplementary? My mic is working, I was pushing the wrong button. And sorry, I come in a little bit late, so I'm not sure how do we measure what is significant and what isn't?
Through the chair. Through the chair. So
through the chair again. Sorry, but if we go back to the last slide, because yours is heading on to the next question. But I can just point out briefly. I mean, of course, I don't entirely agree with this approach because I've sort of was committing to capping rates to inflation. But just amending that top. This is what I'm requesting. This is a request, because when you're identifying or less through trade-off savings and efficiencies, which can be divided by council, I would like to see the raft of those trade-off savings efficiencies to bring the enough that we can debate and decide to bring it down to 4% or less, which really means, okay, the difference is 2.7%, but if you want to give us options, then you're more talking about really, okay, give us 3% of, equivalent 3%, this is my request, 3% of worth of trade-off savings and efficiencies that we could debate to fully appreciate what it would take to get us down to that target of, say, 4%.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to say through the challenges section is, given the constraints of you've already agreed level of service with the community, given the constraints of LTP amendment territory, given the constraints of your revenue and financing policy, given the constraints of your financial strategy. So tomorrow we could say, let's loan fund $5 million of that. Let's smooth depreciation, not fund $5 million of depreciation. That's the decision absolutely council can make. I suspect, given you've agreed with the community that you would fund depreciation, that you would not loan fund operational, that's a fairly significant decision. And that's the challenge, Councillor Campbell. So what we're saying, we've got a lot of cost pressures, and actually without using any of the levers which will be available to you through the LTP, and I suspect you're going to have some very tough conversations with the community, particularly around that level of service space, that we just won't be able to get there this annual plan without LTP amendment.
But could I ask, as an exercise, since 1 million is 1%, this is ballpark stuff, as an exercise, and it would demonstrate to the public too, actually, this exercise, $4 million of trade-offs. Yeah, I'll say it 4 because $4 million of trade-offs. What impact that would do, and what it will show us. Can we do that?
So cutting out $4 million of operating costs would be a significant change to the community, because we would have to turn things off. So in a council that is service-based...
part of that is capital.
No, it's not. Small. No, it's not, because the capital funding will not change your depreciation. Again, I can non-fund depreciation, but your depreciation charge to rates will still be your depreciation charge, because that's essentially a charge to make sure the ratepayers who are using the assets, depreciating the assets, are paying for them through funding renewals.
Well, me personally, I would be very interested, and I'm sure many of the members of the public would be also, to see that exercise being done, because it's kind of like saying, we can't do it, but Wanganui can. How did they? Someone else did it.
Is what you asked.
The price. I want to know the price we would pay, and it would be clarify to the public as well.
Yeah.
And then if I was a member of the public and I'd see that, I'd sort of going, well, how did Wanganui do this? But they didn't pay that price.
I totally understand your concern, but we did agree a certain level of service with the community. Wanganui may have agreed a lower level of service, or a lowering of level of service through their long-term plan. Councillor Taylor did bring up really good stats on the fact that 74% of people agreed with where we were going in the long-term plan, which was challenging for us now to reconcile. So I totally understand your concern, and the community sentiment is there, Councillor Campbell. I absolutely have no, qualms about saying that. But it's hard to reconcile when we've agreed and consulted on a long-term plan with the community, and we're limited with the mechanisms. So again, I could bring a thing to you to say with $4 million without cutting level of service. I don't think we can ask that from the business, but I can say, yep, you could loan fund $4 million of OPEX costs, which will then go on to your next year's and future ratepayers to pay. You could put off depreciation $4 million, but those are kind of your options.
Yeah, I want to see them. I want to see them up on the screen.
But that would be a long-term plan discussion rather than an annual plan discussion, if I'm understanding correctly.
It would trigger probably a long-term plan amendment, given
we're trying to avoid, because we're going into long-term plan, and that's where these discussions will definitely come up, and that's probably the time to ask the staff to do that, rather than hang on, I'm still talking, rather than getting them to do that for the annual plan. That would be something we might like to look at when we actually have the mechanisms to be able to make those changes.
Oh, well, I'm saying, due process, that would usually be the case, but my understanding, you can still change these things with an annual. There's no hard and fast rule. Thou shalt not change these things through an annual plan, and you must have to wait till the long-term plan until you do this. I mean,
Yeah. So changing your financial strategy would be something that you would have to go out and talk to the community about, and depending on the level of change, possibly trigger a long-term plan amendment, which will probably cost you in the likes of $300,000 to $500,000. And you're coming up to a long-term plan year.
What are you paying $300,000 for?
Audit fees, time, and as staff, look, I'm going to say my finance team is trying to separate waters as a business unit. My finance team are beyond capacity. so that is a little bit challenging from a staff resourcing perspective as well.
Yeah, and remember, staff time is OPEX, so immediately hits rates. Anyway, my question, I'm very sorry if you've already said this, I was a bit distracted at the beginning. Is there a rates increase if we don't do anything to this annual plan? Do we know where we're tracking if we don't change anything? I might have missed that at the beginning.
We will bring that information further, but it is above, as we said, there's pressures above what we expected in the long-term plan. So it is a bigger number that we then, as staff, have been working on bringing to a more palatable and closer to the long-term plan. So then we don't have to necessarily go out with options to the community when we don't really have options given the boundaries we are living by in this annual plan.
I'm just interested to know how far out the we've said 6.7. What actually is it, and how? And because we're going to have to work back from that, so it would just be interesting to know what that's currently sitting at.
So there are, Andrew presented the range of costs that have increased. Look, we know our uncontrollable costs are substantial. So regulatory charges, for example, that's 300,000 more on OPEX. Our depreciation, as Andrew said, 750,000 more on OPEX. So electricity, I think, was about 300,000 on OPEX. So there's quite a lot of big costs. So it's just.
So
we'll bring that.
I'm just going to add that we're just going through an internal approval process. As an exec team, we go through all the budgets before they come to you. So if you can just let us do that process, then we can validate or make changes before we bring it back.
Kevin.
It's more of a comment, and just a word of caution. I think it's unwise to look at other councils and what the outcome they have achieved and say, oh, well, they did it, therefore we should, without knowing the process they went through, without knowing how they got to where they got to, or the cost involved. And I have looked at the councils mentioned, and it's not a dream picture. There are some costs and there's some pitfalls in it. So I just think we should focus on what we're able to do. Yes, we can leverage off others, but if we're using them as an example without knowing the details, I think that's a pretty dangerous position to be in.
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor Taylor, we're absolutely happy to have conversations with those council, and we're pretty heavily involved in the sector, as is from a planning perspective and from a financial perspective, trying to understand and learn from each other, because absolutely if there's something to learn, we're totally all for that. And believe it or not, again, given we're saying that there's a number of pressures and that number is challenging to get to, we are really committed to bringing that rates number down, and our focus will totally be on doing such in a long-term plan process where we can talk level of service, because really hard to cut 4 million of OPEX and not turn some things off.
Christine.
I think Duncan's request was perfectly reasonable. All he's saying, and I think you interpret it, Sarah, as a big piece of work. I don't see it like that at all. What he was asking is, as a politician, a lot of people around this table made promises about rates. We need to be able to say really clearly, if we did that and it got reduced to this, these are the outcomes. This is what you're going to live with as a community. I want to be able to say that. I don't think it needs to be a big piece of work. I want a little piece of paper that says you're going to lose this, this, this and this. And you know, if you work in central government and your minister is out there representing what he said he's going to do and he can't do it, you want every bit of information you've got. And I do have to say, just because Duncan asked for it doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm sorry, but I think we react like that a lot, and that was a legitimate request, and I don't see it as a big piece of work. So sorry, I just feel that way.
So
Thank you, Christine.
So through the chair, I wasn't totally, as I said, we can bring back options, but those options will be outside of long-term plan. So I think it will be about presenting that to the public. So when Andrew and the team bring back, here's your annual plan, here's what we've had to do to get to even within that long-term plan number. These are the other things we could do, but actually that would trigger a long-term plan amendment. It would be non-funding depreciation, cutting level of service, but it's really hard to go, we'll cut these exact levels of service to get to, because that is a big... No, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I think you're both right. I wasn't actually going to talk on that, but I think what Christine Duncan is saying is having that information on hand, we wouldn't then vote for it to trigger it to the level of consultation you were talking about, but to have it on hand so that we can have real conversations with the community would be useful. I think, Andrew, I was just going to go back to your original question to us, which was, are we as individuals happy with sort of the proposal? And I just wanted to answer your question and say yes. That looks fabulous, and I'm in agreement myself that if the annual plan small changes that we are looking at aren't triggering the significance and engagement policy things that you've outlined, then I would be happy to keep that lower level of consultation that you referred to. Very happy with that rather than going wider.
Yeah, through the chair. So in terms of significance and engagement and consultation, we normally call that type of engagement where we're not necessarily going up for a full formal consultation process where we have a hearing and we have a submissions process. We usually call that more of an inform. So we're going to go out, we have conversations in the community with people about what's happening. They can ask the questions, they can have a back and forward with us, and we have those conversations with everyone without that formalised hearing process and people coming in.
Thank you, Andrew. Please carry on.
Awesome. I mean, so in terms of that conversation, sorry, I'll go back and answer the question about significance through the chair. I'll just go back. So we have a significance and engagement policy that was adopted in 2022. That outlines the matrix for levels of significance, and if something is of a high level of significance, it is determined to be legislatively significant. So that's when the Act, the Local Government Act or another Act says, if you're making a significant change, you must consult. If that change is, when we weight the matrix, so it's not just if one aspect of the thing hits the high, that doesn't automatically make it a high level of significance. It's a multi-factor. So we go through and you have to assess each one of those criteria. And if on balance most of them are high, then we would be saying that's probably an item of a high level of significance, and the community will definitely want to know about that, why that's changing and what's going on with that. So there are some thresholds there around, for example, the top item is around price. For unplanned expenditure, if it's $200,000 of OPEX or $2 million in CAPEX, that kind of gives you a flavour for the high level of significance items.
Oh, if I could just point out, I'm sure, like lots of things in this goes on in this place. A lot of those things, apart from say the financial thresholds, are pretty subjective interpretation, and I'm sure they've been twisted and turned in all sorts of ways all over the place. I'll just say that.
Andrew.
So you guys have obviously had some of that conversation around that proposed approach. We've heard from some of our councillors that we're comfortable with that approach. If you are mostly in agreement that you're comfortable with this approach, that we will bring you something else. We'll bring you a budget that looks like 6.7 or less, and we'll note those trade-offs, we'll note those items, and allow you then to have that discussion. And if those items are, if we can keep them away from it, we'll keep them away from an LTP amendment, and if we can keep them away from triggering significance, we will try our best to do so.
But through the chair, I think what's been asked also is that we bring back a couple of options outside of that, which is just the kind of things you could do, but would trigger an LTP amendment, and that gives you information for the community. But again, what Andrew was trying to say is that actually from an annual plan perspective, and given the boundaries of our long-term plan, we're trying to keep within those changes that don't trigger that.
So Andrew, I think you've got to be careful about the silence around the room. Agreeing, 6.7 is a step. 6.7 is a step in the right direction, but the public are expecting a lot more. So they just need to understand the repercussions of achieving a lower increase.
Through the chair, we will present that. We'll provide that information the best we can in terms of those other alternative options that could potentially get that number lower, and the consequences of those. LTP amendment, consultation requirements, financial responsibility and sustainability. We will bring those. We'll bring those items to you, and ultimately, when you go through your LTP process, that will be the prime opportunity for council to make those decisions in consultation with the community, and the community then being able to understand, hey, the outcome of this is that we're in a space where certain things aren't going to happen anymore. Council's not going to do certain things, or council won't build certain things. Whatever that looks like, that is up to obviously the community and yourselves to make that call on what those things specifically are, but they'll be able to then fully understand those items. On the basis of that, we'll bring that back to you, and we're intending to bring that back to you by February 24th for a workshop. For another workshop, a discussion which will have those items where you can have a discussion about those items.
And that include delaying CAPEX as well, options we've got there, which we could do within the annual plan, by using the delay tactics.
Yeah.
Sarah, you get shaking your head.
Yeah. To an extent, again, still comes back to that significance. So particularly significant changes to significant activities are very challenging within an annual plan process. So the slight tweaks, which I suspect we will present to you as, hey, we can move these things out. But again, we need to be really careful because we made promises with the community to deliver certain things, as well as what I talked about earlier, that there are a number of things that are actually renewal and growth funded. So from a CapEx perspective, already paid for, and we kind of have to do them through financial prudence measures or because of the growth, and it's really that level of service stuff that does actually hit rates. So very little in the CapEx space that can be done to make a noticeable impact on rates.
Duncan?
You can I just point out though that this, I think I should point out that this 6.7 figure is the figure that was originally put in the LTP. We're sticking with that. So those of us who are elected on our own self-made platforms of chopping rates down, this is nothing. This is no compromise, no change. Well, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this is tragic. We're not compromising anything. There's nothing being achieved here. We've achieved nothing. This is a failure.
I think through the chair, that would be unfair to say that of staff. We're really trying hard to, and that's why it says 6.7 or less. We certainly won't be presenting 8.7 to you. So we are trying our hardest to get that number down as low as you can without sacrificing anything that we've agreed with the community, or which is in council strategy, which has been consulted on with the community, or our other policies. So we are working with those boundaries, and I think that's what we are trying to present today, but we are trying to do that in the most cost effective way we can, given the pressures Andrew's presented. So we're absolutely not saying 6.7, hey, that's the target. That is in our minds a ceiling, and we are doing whatever we can to bring that down as staff.
Duncan, if I could just interrupt you there. What you've got to take into account, there's been huge cost increases in the likes of power and all the other costs, as Andrew mentioned, chemicals and things like that. So they would have been unplanned when that 6.7 was originally agreed to. And trying to achieve it is actually, so there has been some gains. You can shake your head, but if you're in business, the people in business know that and feel that, that's significant, those increases.
And through the Mayor, can I just add, look, I don't want to be that councillor in 2 years' time, having put our head in the sand and saying, oh, don't we feel good, we've only done a 4% increase, and the next generation is picking up the bill. And, there's a change of government or whatever. We've got to be real about this stuff. And this is a little bit of an opportunity we've got around that 6.7 or less, but taking on board what the public have already said to us, what they want. And, we've just got to really listen to that and make sure that we can achieve the best possible outcome.
I'll just point out, I mean, if we remember who our customer is, it's actually the ratepayer, and okay, look, it's just political talk, if you like, but we should be revolving around them rather than around us, and we should be working harder and fitting it around and working better to fit around their expectations and their needs, not just going along with it. But whatever.
With respect, Duncan, we have to do that in a fiscally prudent way. We shouldn't be underfunding infrastructure and causing future damage, long-term damage. So whilst I 100% agree with you, we want to get the rates down, none of us are here to put rates up, for God's sake. We want to bring rates down, but we have to do it in a prudent, responsible way. And I don't want to go outside of the mechanism and spend a lot of money, operational money, that does affect rates, having to go out and consult on a long-term plan change when we're about to go into long-term plan discussions. And that's exactly where we can have the discussions that you're wanting to have. We have the ability to look at what you want to do in the long-term plan, not so much in the annual plan. It's unfortunate, but we are bound by what we've promised. And if we go and make any significant changes, we have to go out and consult, or it triggers a long-term plan renewal, and we're about to go into that. That's not financially or fiscally prudent. That is not a good use of ratepayers' money.
Yeah, and through the chair, I think these are absolutely the conversations you need to be having with the community through the long-term plan. You could get your rates increased down to 1% if you can agree with the community that you're going to make some trade-offs and stop. Again, that will be your focus to what, listen to the community, what's important to you, what level of service are you willing to, sacrifice for, lower rates, all of those conversations. And rates caps will definitely support those conversations to happen.
Christine.
I just wanted to say finally that I think these conversations are really healthy. They're more robust than we usually have, and we don't have to agree with each other. We need to argue things out until we get to the right point, and I think they're healthy, so thank you for that.
I think we all agree we want the lowest increase we can get. That's possible. Andrew, do you wish to carry on?
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much, councillors. So, on the basis of that very robust discussion, we will bring back both the options to make sure we stick to 6.7 or less. Those changes that fit within the framework of an annual plan, and we'll also bring some of those options that potentially provide options to go lower than that and the consequences of those. And we intend to bring those to you on February 24 for a workshop. Thank you very much. Any further questions?
I'll just affirm, if you can get it, which no one wants to do, but if you can get it down to...
It's not that no one wants to do it, Duncan, we just want to do it at the right time.
The ones that I want to do, if you can get them all down, way down to 4%.
Duncan, if you want your conversation recorded, hit your mic.
No one's recording it anyway, so...
Well, I think it'll be... Yeah.
Oh, it isn't?
Sorry, I think it'll be more... I think it'll be more principles based because again, we've agreed on level of service of the community. It'd be really hard for staff to decide which service to turn off, right? Or what service to lower. So it'll be more principle based. You could lower service, level service and cut $4 million out. And these are the kind of things you could consider, but we've already agreed on them with the community. You could consider non-funding depreciation. This is the impact. This is why it's outside the financial strategy. You could consider loan funding operations. So probably more principled level, but absolutely as a council, if you, want to go down that route, there's an option. It wouldn't be a pretty one, as I said, given it would trigger an LTP amendment likely, but it is an option. That is your decision to make.
Sarah and Andrew, thank you. Have you got more to carry on? We are starting to run a little bit late.
That's everything. Thank you very much, Your Worship. And we will see you again, hopefully, on February 24 for another discussion about those options. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next item is the induction, procurement and delegation discussion.